to We Need to Name This, where we unpack the hidden curriculum of academe with scholars of color. I'm Laura Ann Jacobs, and this is my co-host,
Ebony Bruce Harvey.
Today's episode is titled Being My Authentic Self in Academia. So to get started, we would like to introduce an amazing, awesome woman of color scholar, Monét Cooper, who's going to share a little bit with us about her experiences. But first, we're going to share a little bit about her and give you an introduction to Monét. A second-year doctoral student in the joint program in English and Education, Monét Cooper comes to the University of Michigan, Washington, D.C. after spending 11 years serving students and families in the secondary English classroom. She uses interiority, Black queer theorizations of selfhood and futurity, and ethnographic methods to learn how LGBTQIA+ African American and Latinx girls and gender non-binary students encounter hope in their humanity in English secondary classrooms. She also researches the impacts of internalized Blackness on educator relationships with themselves and students and families, curriculum and instruction, perceptions of Black potential, and school policy. Just as important, Monét is a Georgia peach. Her family and friends are her people, and the red clay that made her still sits in her skin. She enjoys baking and eating German chocolate cake, museum and theater visits, reading, writing, working out, and naps.
Yes, love a good nap.
Thank you for joining us, Monét.
Thank you so much, Monét. So we're just going to be asking you questions about your experience and just learning some more about you and how we can navigate academia. So our first question is, how did you determine what you wanted to research? How did your interests change and grow over time? And then also, how did you choose an institution that would help you thrive and to grow?
Well, I came, so about maybe 3 years before I actually applied, I had begun thinking about applying to pursue a PhD. But it felt like so impossible. I also was just asking myself, what will I study? What am I interested in? But at this point in my career, so I think I was probably in year 7 or 8, I had a lot of questions. And there were just a lot of questions that I started really sitting with. And I was reading journal articles to also help me understand maybe why I was asking certain questions or certain techniques that I could be using. And at the time I was at a charter school, and that particular space was probably, one of the most liberatory spaces I'd been able to work in. And it was a space where students, I worked in the high school, I was a 10th grade English teacher at the time, where students were leading a lot of our social justice work. Students were very critically engaged in, no place is a utopia, but that place, I'm so thankful for what I was able to learn and what I was able to do and the freedom I was given to learn and do those things that I know other people in other spaces and places who are also my friends in other schools just didn't have. And in particular, my pedagogy in terms of like justice and liberation grew, it expanded. I was working with an organization called Teaching for Change, to build curriculum, to just understand myself. And it was also, I would say it was also that time when I really began to think about my own queer identity. And just, I would say, spend time with myself, but also think about the ways that school disciplines people's bodies. And allows some people to do a thing and other people not to. Or what is my role as a teacher in disciplining students' bodies, students' orientations toward learning, toward what they believe is possible. And I think the more I ended up leaving the school, I thought I was going to take time off from teaching, but it pulled me back in. So I ended up teaching another 3 years. Another 2 years at a different school. So I had 11 years total teaching outside of the academy. But I really was asking questions about, well, why is it that when I'm looking at some of the challenges that students are facing in school, you know, what feels most consistent, at least for me, and some of the things that I was thinking about and examining is that so many of these kids are queer and trans. And in what ways am I, as someone who is a Black educator, how am I supporting their possibility? I was just thinking about, well, what would that have meant for me to be in a school at this time? What did it mean when, you know, I'm working with students who are questioning their gender or questioning their sexuality? And what are the resources that I need to be able to support them as they're doing all of this identity exploration? To be a teacher who's also needs to introduce curriculum where this particular student group can see themselves alive and flourishing and working through what it means to be alive and full of possibility. The lifespan for a Black trans woman in this country is 35 years of age, which is short.
Yes.
Oh, short. And we have to understand that schools play a role in that lifespan, that is trans students, it's queer students, it's questioning students, but it's also straight students. And trans women, by and large, when we look at who is abusing them, when we look at who's killing them, it's people who are who might self-identify as being straight, and is experiencing a kind of rupture around their own identity because they're attracted to a trans woman, or they're in a relationship with a trans woman. And so what does that also mean for our classroom context, to be a space where everybody gets to explore their identity, where everybody gets to explore this idea of aliveness? So that's a slice. I had a student who ended up leaving the school, and I saw this person, and there had been rumors about, you know, what had happened, but I felt like as a school, like there should have been things that we were doing to support this student, their family, so that this wasn't a destiny. This wasn't an option for this person. And you know, I don't want to shade sex work. Sex work is work. But this was not something that this particular person wanted to be involved in. And just in my relationships in terms of volunteering at different organizations, it is difficult for trans, non-binary, queer students and youth to often have gainful employment or consistent gainful employment that gives them health benefits to survive. And so I'm just really curious about how schools in particular can be contexts of survival and possibility, and what needs to happen in the context, but also in the curriculum and instruction that moves forth, that creates a space of possibility for these students. And then in terms of choosing a school, choosing an institution. So I really wanted to be in a place that allowed me to explore the humanities alongside the social science. So I see both as being really important in my work. And a lot of the theorizations that I'm using come from the humanities space, especially the Black humanities space, especially the queer humanities spaces. And I'm trying to use those formulations to really think about how queer and trans students, Black and brown queer and trans students, make sense of those identities, of their learning, of their possibility in school spaces. So it's a way to listen, it's a way to see.
And in terms of your research so far, in the couple of years you've been in academia, do you feel like your research has been supported in the spaces that you inhabit at the university?
Well, I think that there's a couple things. So one is, I think that the professors, the faculty who I've been able to have interactions with have been deeply excited about my work and believe in it, and are just like, yes, Monet, write the paper. No, for real, like write it, like it's due. like, this is amazing, and have been great about guiding me through. I think I was really feeling away this summer and maybe at the beginning of the school year, in terms of just, and have talked with folks, and this is like grad students in this institution, but also other institutions about this. And so it's not something that's specific to the University of Michigan, but that in many ways, Black and brown students, we're brought into the university, we're brought into an institution from people who are probably genuinely excited about our research or our work, but may not always have the tools to help us do that work. They may also not always know the people in the field or whatever.
Yeah.
Though there are people who do. And then you're looking at people who are doing some of the work you're interested in, and they are bombarded because they are, intersectionally minoritized and marginalized. So, they're working on a space. They're working on projects that they've made space for and that are exciting, and that you're like, yes, this is it. I want to learn how to do this thing, but there's a long line to be able to have access to that person. And so I think like there's a thing that I'm coming to understand, which is one that one of my biggest helps has been other grad students, where they're like, oh, I'm reading this thing, let me help you, or I'm taking this class, let me send you this syllabus, or let's just sit and talk about what we're learning, and we're just taking notes and we're talking about our ideas, and we're helping each other, which is natural. But the other challenge is, I think that I don't know if it's an assumption or what, but there seems to be some kind of understanding that we as students understand what the university, the academy is about and how it's structured. And there is a lot of on-the-job learning. And so I think I was just really frustrated because I felt like, you brought me here and said, oh yeah, we're excited about your work and we can help you do this. And it's like, can you? Like, I feel like in some ways, I'm running around, I'm trying to read not just what we're reading in class, but I'm also reading extra things outside of the class so it can speak to what I'm trying to do and what I'm trying to understand. But then I go to the archive, and then I'm reading, texts by Audre Lorde, by Barbara Smith, by Polly Murray, by Gloria Anzaldúa, Cherry Moraga, like all these people who are writing about what it means to be a woman in the academy, or what it means to be a woman in a learning space, and to really be faced with the space that you must make for yourself and your research. So I'm like, oh, this isn't new. They've been doing this since like time. And so I really have been drawing a lot of just ancestral power and love and joy and rest from the work that, my queer academic friends to my mind have been offering me through the things that they've been writing, because nothing is new under the sun. I mean, Shakespeare said that, or somebody else that he plagiarized said that. So then that means that I don't have to reinvent a path. I just need to do the work. And that means being a friend, showing up for my folks. Right now, a lot of people in and outside of the academy are experiencing like mental health structures. It's just a lot. Like, what does it mean that we're at an institution and we don't have a spring break?
Yeah.
And so I have to give myself permission to take a break. I have to, and I think this is a part of the learning too, because nobody's telling you give yourself a break. It's also you teaching yourself how to love yourself in a space that does not love you. And I don't know if these institutions are supposed to love us. So, that's a conversation for another day, but it's to recognize that I have to love myself. And every day I have to think through, what does that mean? I have to love my research. I have to love my collaborators. And my accountability is to, my younger queer self, this little girl who thought she was straight, but wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
And what are the things that, I want to write into for her, who needed that. And for these kids, my collaborators who are so smart, who are incisive, who are surviving,
Mm-hmm.
and who have things to say in this research, not just me as maybe somebody who uses the tools, but these students who are very capable of speaking to themselves through the mechanisms of the academy. So I think part of this has also been being aware of the ways that our we are resourced by the academy, our time, our energy, our melanin,
Mm-hmm.
and for us to be able to say no to the things that feel like we're being used and resourced, and
Mm-hmm.
yes to the things that feel more like an exchange, like I am learning or I'm seeding something here, that's not just for me. So I think that those are the things that feel most resonant. And I want to give grace to folks too. Like I don't I think that there's ways that the university positions everybody in very transactional ways, even people we love, even people we admire. And so also just being mindful to give them grace so I can give myself grace, because I am not perfect.
Mm-hmm.
And to just understand we're all people. Like we're people in an institution that commodifies us. It commodifies our intellect, commodifies our labor, our ideas. So there are things that we cannot expect this institution to do. But as somebody who is an abolitionist, who believes in liberation, I'm choosing to love, and I'm choosing to rest, and I'm choosing to lead in those ways. Doesn't mean I'm not going to say no. It doesn't mean I'm not going to mess up. But what it does mean is that, I have to understand the systems and the structures and the ways that people are forced to interact in these structures. So yeah, I might be upset at a thing or a person, but I can let it go, because that would mean that I don't transgress, that
Mm-hmm.
I'm not up here being messy myself. So I think it's also a learning about my research, and maybe about the hows of my research, and drawing on just the wide and deep resources of people whose work I admire here at the university, but also in other spaces outside of this place. And who do I want to be? Who do I want to become? And who do I owe? I think, as Ava DuVernay says, who do I owe the woman who I want to become in the future? That to be a good ancestor doesn't begin, when I pass from this earth to another. It starts now.
The life. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thanks so much. I think one thing that we do is we get caught up. Sometimes we can get into an environment and we just take up what the environment kind of puts into us, instead of saying, no, 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 there's some problematic things happening in the environment and I need to push back against that in order to be able to thrive in the environment. And sometimes I feel like academia can be that way, where you get there and you're like, okay, I got to get in the grad, I got to take classes, I got to do this, I got to do research, I got to find a research team, I got to do this, do this, do this. And you end up just falling into whatever academia tells you you need to do, right? Because you're trying to be successful. And these folks say, this is how you're successful, right? And sometimes not even like thinking about, well, what does success mean to me? I'm defining my success by what academia says success is supposed to be. And so I think you bring up an excellent point of thinking about, who am I in this space, right? And how, what am I going to say yes to? What am I going to say no to? Who am I? Who do I want to work for? You understand what I'm saying? So I think that's really powerful, and how you are navigating your own identity within the space that you've entered. Yep.
Thank you for that. I feel so seen and affirmed, Ebony. And I admire you both so much. Ebony, you were like the first, I guess, in person, you were the first Black grad student I met. And well, no, it was Crystal, Xanders, and you. And Chandra introduced me to you. And I remember you had braids and you were in the
Yeah.
black outfit. And you just came right in and you just you and Chandra gave each other a hug and like held it. And you were like, I'm good. I'm good. And then you, so I think that even if I hadn't chosen Michigan, um, there was a demonstration that the academy can also look that way. Like even though maybe I don't know all the ways it can look this way
Mhm.
as well. And I think it's important for us to always remember that both and. Yeah, like
Mhm.
yeah, you're gonna have nights where you just you just made that deadline by the hairs of your chinny chin chin. And you know, there's these other moments that feel heavy, but just they release lightness. Like I'm thinking of our meal exchanges, Laura Ann, where it was like
Mhm.
Laura Ann and Gabby making food
Well, that was
for
a
each
fun
other and
time.
just exchanging it. And it was came along very happenstance too. So
Yeah.
like that's important too. And the academy can look that way too.
Yeah.
So what does it mean when we make a decision to shape it in particular ways so that we get to experience joy and
Yes.
possibility
Yes.
amidst the rigors that are going to happen in the space that are really kind of a part of a lot of working spaces,
Yep.
certainly as a teacher, but are certainly endemic to the academy. That
Mhm.
like unless you're working hard, you know, are you really working? You know, unless you get many grants, are you really doing the labor? If you
Mhm.
aren't getting published, like what do you have to show for it? But one of my favorite scholars is Kevin Kwashi, who just dropped Black Aliveness at the end of February, beginning of this month, at Brown, and um, he really takes his time. He's like D'Angelo and Lauryn Hill, and scholars like that have really made me think about what does it mean to invest in, like we think about the slow food movement. What does it mean to invest in slow scholarship?
Mhm.
Scholarship that really seeks not just to publish and have a thing out there in the universe. Not that there's anything wrong with that,
Mhm.
but to tend to your research and your scholarship like a constant gardener, like a farmer would their field. And I'm really trying to hold that close as well.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, we've anticipated so many of our questions. I think that, a big question I had as we were planning for this episode is even what do we mean by being our authentic selves when we talk about being our authentic selves in academia? And I kind of just wrote down a few things, Monet, that I heard you say, which were, especially when speaking of your students, you use the phrase, what does it mean to be alive and full of possibility? And I think that's, to me, resonates as a statement of what does it mean to be our authentic selves. You're talking about your own scholarship. You talked about the excitement that you feel about learning new things and engaging with new community. You talked about ancestral joy and, honoring those who come before you and incorporating those into your work and also like into your soul in so many ways. And, you know, loving yourself, loving the younger you and loving the future you. And so I think that those are just what you've spoken about today about what does it mean to be our authentic selves? Like what is the energy we carry with us as we try to, bring our authentic selves into academia? So I want to thank you for giving your thoughts on that. I think one thing that we were wondering also is like what are some of the challenges of being your authentic self in academia, and also how do you reground yourself in those moments? Like how do you how do you reconnect back to those being alive, feeling full of possibility, being excited, connecting with the ancestral joy? How do you reground yourself? If what advice might you have to others?
Well, I was kind of curious about how you all bring, I mean, like before I talk about the challenges, but how do you all bring your authentic selves? Because you all are two people who I just deeply admire, where in any space I've seen you, you all always show up like full, like of yourself. And you're not, there's no, I mean, shoot, identities are performed, whatever. But you all, I feel like there's a thing that you all are really tending to in yourself so that you can do whatever it is you believe you should be doing in that space. And I think that's such a gift. So I'm also here to learn. So what does it mean for y'all, like, to show up as your authentic self? Like, what is what is the thing that you're engaged in to be sure that that's happening for you? Or is that even a thing that you all center?
Well, for me, I think for me, like, pouring into other people is what brings me joy. Like, I see someone in the hallway, I want to give them a hug, and then I'm at the end of the hallway and I'm like this, and they like this, I'm like, I'm hyped for the day. Like, it just takes like that energy, that shared energy and joy that gets me through. I think um, as a doctoral student, as a Black woman, in every day, like, you have these highs and lows. I think somebody does something problematic, then you see your girlfriend, you're like, yo, what's up? You know what I'm saying? So it's like these highs and lows, like, all day long, right? And my goal is to have more highs than lows. You know what I mean? And so those moments, I think what got me through grad school was my community, right? And so as much as I can pour into others, like, they also pour into me, and so I think who I am is, like, I'm a person who loves to joke around and laugh. I love to love, like, like exudingly, not just like, oh, I love you. You know what I'm saying? I send you a little text message. No, I'm hugging, I'm running from the end of the hallway to meet you on the other end. That's me, and when I enter academia, I wasn't going to let that place that's very, like, buttoned up keep me from loving freely, like loving folks, hugging folks, checking in on folks, just doing those things, having those moments of, like, laughter, like, and I mean, laughing out loud, people looking at you crazy, we don't care, we're having a good time, like that's who I am. And I was able to find a community that was just like that, who is just being themselves and love to laugh and love to support each other. And I think for me, being that I've gone to predominantly white institutions my entire academic career, starting from college, this was the first time at the University of Michigan School of Education specifically, where I found my community, right? And I mean, most of my community were people of color, but I also had folks in my community who were white also, who were loving and kind, and, and I think that was something that just kept me going, because I didn't have to stifle my laughter. I didn't have to stifle my joy. I didn't have to stifle my hugs. I didn't have to stifle even how I dressed. Like, I was just like, I'm throwing on sweats today, because what I have on here don't got nothing to do with up here. You know what I'm saying? I'm ready. You know what I'm saying? So I think that for me, I was able to and having an advisor who was just like, I love you for the way you are. You know what I'm saying? Who is just like, whoever you are, whatever you want to research, whatever you want to do, I'm here for it. And I think having that support, especially because I've never, this is the first time I'm, going for a PhD, was also very, just provided me with that, like, entranceway into being myself in the space that I've never navigated before. And I think that, yeah, I think that that's how I've been able to to thrive in the academic space. Yeah. Thanks for asking. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Exuberant joy.
Or and I'm asking you too.
Oh, I hear you. I hear you. I mean, I kind of want to say I just don't know any better, but that's like kind of but it's kind of it is a little true, but I think there are a lot of pieces of me that are a part of what it means to try to be myself and hold myself in academia, and one of those things, I mean, definitely relates to my identity as an adoptee, and some of the things that, whether we acknowledge it or not as adoptees, like, I think rejection is a big part of our stories and learning to understand that. And so, especially in recent years for me, like, understanding that the value of who I am is not dependent upon whether others accept or reject me, right? The wholeness of my humanity, who I am as a person, the potential that I have, and, like, how much I'm allowed to love myself, it's not dependent on others, and it shouldn't be. And that's something that's been a really big influence in my whole life that I'm trying to unlearn and encounter. And, I think I've always been someone who I said maybe I love to share. I love to share food. I love to share laughter. Love to share stories. Love to share memories. I love to share work with people. And like, I think, in graduate school, I realized that that's called community, right? Like it's not just like a trait or thing. It's like, it's not something I do by myself. It's something that I do with other people. And so I think I have a lot of questions about, like, when there are things that are happening in the academy, is it something that lets me share with my community and lets my community share with me? Is it something that lets me be with the people I love, that where we hold space for each other and we love and we value each other, removed from rejection and acceptance, or does it hinder that? Is someone else making the rules for me again? And yeah, I mean, I'll wear the same clothes every day for weeks.
I'll say that.
Ebony has a bulletin board of photos of her time at Michigan. I'm wearing the same shirt over the course of 6 years of photos.
Yes, I
I'm
forgot all
not
about that.
kidding. you know, I mean, who cares? So, yeah, so I think I'm still also definitely learning about being intentional with community and intentional with sharing. I'd like to say I just don't know any better, but I want to know better, and I want to continue to learn about how to do that and to do it with intentionality, and to have community with others and share lives and share dreams with others who I love. So yeah.
Thank you all for sharing. Uh, I love this. Um, it makes me, I mean, you all both talked about community, and I think one of the challenges maybe around authenticity right now as we're moving through multiple pandemics and we're learning online is that piece. So, how do we continue to sustain community in the ways that I had it, my first, like most of my first year, where we were able to, sometimes we've made plans to see each other, but sometimes it's like, I know you're going to be in Hatcher and I'm going to be in Hatcher. So I'm going to see you and we're going to somehow meet up in this kind of very uh, surprising but unsurprising way. And we're going to say, hey, and we're going to sit by each other on the computer and do our work.
Yeah.
The bells start chiming and we have to leave. And maybe we'll go to Rackham or maybe we'll go to this coffee house.
Yeah.
So, I miss that. Because it's like it's community, but it's also accountability.
Mhm.
It's like I have to get this thing done, but you don't have to do it by yourself.
Mhm.
And if I'm writing something and I'm kind of frustrated, or I'm writing something and I need to pause because I'm trying to think about something, I can turn and pause and look at my friend and be like, Mariah, and be like, so do you mind looking at this sentence, or can I talk through this with you?
Mhm.
So I think like those are moments where we're able to be authentic to ourselves because that person is our friend, and will affirm maybe the writing of a thing, but can also say, well, let me ask you some questions about that because this was unclear. And then you can go back in and say, oh yeah, let me clean this up.
Mhm.
Or I think about my friend Ilka, who is a doctoral candidate in engineering, who coached me last year when I was teaching in the English Department Writing Program and was developing a new research unit. And I really wanted to use socially engaged design because I had gone through one of the kind of public modules that the Center for Socially Engaged Design did and loved it, changed my life. So I wanted to do it with students. And so she was like their consultant who was helping me. So now we're friends and I love Ilka so much. And, we were having this email exchange and Ilka said something that was just really profound. And, she's in engineering, she's looking at how things are designed. And she's like, well, how come, planes, how we design a plane is something that is engineered, but or has a what is it that that making airplanes and cars and machines are like designed, but not my great grandma's lace making. Not the food ways that we think about, you know, that's really just chemistry, brilliant chemistry that our ancestors were doing. Or I think about your husband's food that I've heard so much about, Ebony. So I just think I think these conversations make me think. It's like a gentle reminder, even though, you know, I talk with my family. My grandmother isn't here. She passed last summer. And that, like, those conversations are just gentle reminders that the theorizations that come from the academy, I'm reading a lot of Foucault right now, no shade to my man Foucault, or even Sarah Ahmed, who I love, that no shade to them, but, you know, we've been doing this. Our ancestors been doing this. And maybe authenticity isn't simply like I'm showing up myself in a bodily way, but my research is also doing that too. That the way I'm listening is I'm in it. I mean, listening is really what I'm working on right now. That the way I love my partner, Mara, you know, that's like I'm also showing up for her too. And if I'm not fracturing myself, if I'm not saying, well, this is the only place, like I can only be my full self at home or with my friends or with my family or with my love, if I'm saying I'm really doing this as an ethos, which I hear the both of you all doing, then everything I do does that. Audre Lorde has this beautiful speech called "Uses for the Erotic is Power," and that text has been so transformative for me. Really, these past like 8 years, and in it, she talks about the erotic as a space of purpose, a space of joy, where you are purposeful about everything from and joyful about everything from the making of bread and the building of a bookcase to the writing of a book. And so I really try to think about, well, what allows me to experience joy? Okay, authenticity. Or what allows me to experience, like, I'm angry about a thing, like this is unjust, like that's authentic too. I don't like this. This is raggedy. It's ashy. Like, like we're not doing that. Or so I think that guides maybe what I feel like the order the order of operations in my life. And in the same way, sometimes I'm the raggedy one. And so what does that mean when maybe my authenticity ran amok and now I gotta go clean up, you know? So I think authenticity also means that it may take you a minute, but you also gotta apologize. You know, if you're wrong, like it doesn't matter. I mean, it matters what the other person says, but you have to apologize. You have to do what makes it right. And I think those humbling moments those moments of grace have allowed me to be authentically or experience grace in a more authentic way when I have to be the one to give it and I don't want to because I don't feel like it, right? Or the thing you did really hurt me. Well, you know, I hurt somebody else and they gave me grace and they didn't have to. And so I feel like maybe authenticity is a part of liberation, because if you show up with your full authentic self, it's going to be messy sometimes. It's not going to be neat. And I don't think justice is. I don't think liberation is. I don't think abolition is. It's not. If we're engaged with structures of repression and we don't realize that those sit inside of ourselves, then we up to the wrong work. So I think for me, you know, this process of being in the academy has been a blessing in many ways, because I have really good health insurance. I think I have some of the best health insurance I've ever had in my life.
Truly.
Everything's getting fixed.
For real. Okay.
And then it makes me think about, like, well, I wish everybody had great health insurance, like the freedom that just comes with knowing you can have that level of care.
Don't have to worry about that.
but then the accountability, I think, that comes with wellness
Mm-hmm.
is authenticity. Like if I'm able to do all these things, and I'm able to think about myself, because I think as a teacher, when I was a classroom teacher, I was just very student centered and I wasn't Monet centered enough. But I think in this space, it's very much like we say, research is me search.
Yeah.
It's very much about what I'm thinking about, and which has drawn me closer to just my own spiritual practice and having a spiritual life, because that's the site of my authenticity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The challenges and the beautiful struggle.
Yeah. So that just raises the question for me. It's like we enter academia and we're trying to think about being authentic, but not quite understanding how to do that without getting confused with all the messages that we're getting from other places, our advisor, the institution, those types of things. And so, um, let's say that you are sitting in a room with first year graduate students, PhD students, and they're like, look, we're lost. We're trying to figure out how to be true to ourselves as well as thrive, and in academia and do some of that messy work. What advice would you give? Where would you tell them to start? In terms of like trying to figure out who their authentic selves are. Often it's really interesting that when we get into spaces where we might be the minority, or we get into spaces where it's just a new space for us, then we start thinking about, well, who am I? You know what I mean? When you're in spaces that you're, what I'm saying, like spaces where you're like maybe with your family, or in spaces where your racial identity is the predominant identity around you, you're not necessarily thinking about who am I individually, because you may think of yourself within a community. When you get into a community that's very different from what you've experienced, then you start thinking about, well, who am I in relation to this new space I'm in? And so my question to you is, what advice would you give folks when they're first coming into a space that people may not look like them, or may not have the same identities as them, or may not see the world in the same way? How do they stay authentic or true to themselves in spaces that constantly try to pull that away or cause them to stifle who they are?
That's such a good question. My first one was like, are you sure you want me to answer this question? I would say we got to get more people in the room. I mean, we talked about community earlier, and I think, spaces like Wakata, which you all, really beautifully seeded and started, is a space where we do that kind of troubling, and it requires a group. It requires more than one person. There's nobody who's a sage on the stage, but we all have genius, we all have energy. And if we kind of collaborate, then we all are figuring it out together. So I think that's first is there's a what is it, like those cardboard books, those baby books, and it's like Count on Community, which is the counting book. I love it. And it's true, but it's true. Yeah. And so that would be the first thing. The second thing I would ask is like, where is the heat? Where is the space that you feel like the most afraid to go, or you feel the most excitement, or you feel like you feel a stirring? Then that's the space you want to sit yourself down in and maybe listen for a minute. I guess like there's no formula here. There's so many people who've done so many different things in so many different ways. For me, the way that I best articulate myself is through writing. And sometimes I'm writing things to myself, like I'm taking notes. Other times it's through poetry. Other times I'm like, I'm going to write this essay for myself because I'm trying to figure a thing out. And so for people to figure out their language, like for some people it's dance. It's literally moving your body. For some people it's making music. For some people it's singing. For some people it's taking a walk. For some people it's cooking. It depends on who you are. but what is the place that's your other language? And the way in which you're articulating yourself in that space is probably going to be different than maybe how you might be showing up in the classroom. But that thing is still with you.
Yeah.
It's still inside of you. The more I study interiority and seek to understand it, the more that it actually asks us to practice it. And the whole idea of the Black interior is that it's a space beyond resistance. So oftentimes, Black bodies are presented as in resistance to something, whether it's oppression, racism, whatever. And that's how we're positioned. That's how our bodies are documented or and historicized.
Yeah.
But at what point does the body get to be for itself? And that particular space has been so freeing. I read it in Taylor Johnson's poetry. Their book dropped last year. I feel it deeply when I'm on a walk. I feel it when I'm like lifting like a really heavy weight, and it's my mental. It's not about my physical. But where is your interior? And I think for some of us, we've always been different. I think for me, I've always been different. Even when I'm around other Black people, I'm like weird. And it's fine. Like I've come to embrace that about myself, being, weird and strange. And so there's a knowing that even if I'm around my people, that there are ways that I'm being read, either because of how I talk or because of how I carry myself, or because I am free in ways that maybe other people are learning how to be, that I'm being picked up. And I think, as a kid, I was trying to figure that out. Like, I feel like I'm doing these things, but like, what's going on? Like, why does this person not like me? Or why does whatever? But as I got older, I'm just like, this is how I was made and this is how I was built. And I found my people and my people have found me. And that's always been the prayer. My people don't always share my racial or ethnic background. They don't always share my, like, the first language I have. They don't always share, my, well, I love a lot of music, but I've had some friends that have been into some real heavy metal rock. And I'm like, I don't know how we found our way to each other, but I love you. But your people can look lots of different ways. And if you've made a choice to be in an environment, I was thinking about Saeed Jones, and I was getting ready for class. It had to have been the first or second month of school. And Saeed dropped his memoir in the fall of 2019. So that's how I know. And he was being interviewed on NPR, and he had moved from Brooklyn to Ohio, to Cleveland, I believe. And the interviewer was asking him about, missing Brooklyn, think about Brooklyn and all, like, New York and what that is. And Ebony, I'm surprised you didn't shout out Brooklyn. Is you from there?
I'm trying to hold back. You know what I'm saying? I don't want to cut you off. You know what I'm saying? I don't want to be disrespectful.
I know you gotta say it. Brooklyn. And he said, I made a choice to be here. And that really sat with me. Like, I made a choice to be here. Nobody made me come here. I had other options. I had other things I could have done. I made a choice to be here. And so in making the choice to be in Michigan, which experiences more months of cold than it does summer, I was like, I'm going to love the winter. I'm going to figure out, how do I love the winter? I am a summer baby, summer girl through and through. I'm a Georgia peach, and I mean that in the heat and the humidity that radiates from my DNA. Laura Ann knows. So, that I always have a choice. Yeah. And I think that's the other thing, is that I think I've as a teacher, and I'm so thankful for my students, I could cry right now, but they taught me to shape my reality, that if I wanted our classroom to be positioned in a certain way, then I worked with them to co-create that space. Even if the school wasn't or couldn't do it, that was what we were going to do. When I made a decision, like, I'm not going to write kids up, we're going to have to figure this out between us and parents. because I don't want them to have this thing following them in this content management system that is telling a particular story about them. Then I'm going to figure that out, right? Like I have a choice. And I think that's what I always sit with. And I think that's the thing I would say is that you always have a choice. Every day you have a choice. Every day you have a choice. You can go to class or not. And guess what? It's going to be fine. I'm here to tell you, as somebody who's like a checkbox, like I got to get to class, it's going to be okay if you don't show up, right? But you have a choice. And so what is that going to look like? And I think what that's meant for me is that I have to be true to myself. I'm my grandmama's child. I have to be true to myself. My ancestors were smart and industrious. They were smart enough to survive long enough to ensure that I showed up in the world. And my life is in some ways a debt to them. Their choice to live, their choice to have children when they were experiencing oppression, their choice, even if they were self-medicating with alcohol, even if they weren't really doing the best at surviving, to still be alive and to give my elders stories to give to me that I want to give through these academic, intellectual, like knowledge making spaces. That's a choice. And so the debt I owe is so big, I don't think I can ever repay it. But every day I can make a choice on how I'm going to show up, the words that leave my mouth, the things that I commit myself to doing and being. And that it's okay to make a choice to leave here. If this is not the place that you feel is for you, it's okay to leave. But I believe, like some people don't believe this, but I believe you can be an activist and be in the academy. I believe that you can actually get rich and be in the academy. I see people do it. Like people say, don't come here and be rich, but let's be real. There's people making money off of poverty publishing, talking about disparity, talking about DEI, and your collaborators, your subjects, their situationship never changes. And so I think we just have to make choices. And at the end of the day, I'm really just critiquing myself and the choices I've made and the choices I didn't make. So I think that's the thing. I just would encourage them to sit in their choices and to own them joyfully.
Thank you for joining us for We Need to Name This, a series where we unpack the hidden curriculum of academe. Join us for our next episode, I Have to Teach, Now What? With Dr. Dominic Bednar. For more information, visit www.weneedtonametthis.com.